Super Mario RPG was one of the last games released on the Super Nintendo before the launch of Nintendo's newest console, the Nintendo 64. Yet despite it being released so late in the console's lifespan, and it being in a completely different genre than any other Mario game at the time, it was a huge success. It blew away Nintendo's expectations. In 1996, it sold more than many of Nintendo's games on their new system, like Star Wars Shadows of the Empire and Pilotwings 64. And it even outsold games on the insanely popular Sony PlayStation, like Resident Evil, Crash Bandicoot, and Tekken 2. Of course, considering the game did so well, talks of a sequel were inevitable. In fact, there were plans for a sequel before Super Mario RPG even came out, and it was supposed to be made for the Nintendo 64. Unfortunately, things didn't quite work out that way. The mid-90s were not one of Nintendo's finest times. Nintendo made a ton of questionable business decisions in this era. The Big N began working on a joint project with Sony to make a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo, but they bailed at the last minute to work with Dutch electronics company Philips, but that deal went nowhere, so instead we got Nintendo licensed games on Philips CDI, which led to such fondly remembered classics like Hotel Mario and Link: The Faces of Evil.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
Sony went on to make their own console, the PlayStation. But hey, all Sony got was one of the most successful game consoles of all time, while Nintendo got some great YouTube poop, so who really won that battle?
You know what they say.
Nintendo also came out with an add-on for the Super Famicom called the Satellaview, in collaboration with Japanese satellite company Saint Giga. The Satellaview allowed players to download games via a satellite broadcast to a special game cartridge and play them with cool new features like streamed audio, which allowed for real-time voice acting. It was incredibly ahead of its time, but it was also really expensive as you needed the add-on itself, a special BS tuner, a satellite dish, and you had to pay a subscription fee. It was also only available through mail order, so you couldn't even buy this thing in your local retail store. Add on Saint Giga getting into some legal issues, and you have a whole salad of reasons for this flop. Nintendo also released a new experimental handheld around this time, the Virtual Boy. Their last big blunder was choosing to use cartridges over CDs for the new Nintendo 64. Cartridges are faster than CDs and pirating them is a lot more difficult, but CDs are far cheaper and have more storage. Choosing carts over discs pissed off a lot of Nintendo's trusted third-party developers, including the developers of Super Mario RPG, Square. Square decided to focus on the PlayStation, so Nintendo needed a new team to work on the next Mario RPG. Nintendo actually put out an advertisement in Weekly Famitsu magazine asking for people to send in their resumes to apply for the brand new dev team. The headline for this ad was, "We are recruiting super staff members to form a super team that will make a super game," the second Mario RPG. Eventually, Nintendo got Intelligent Systems, a company that had helped Nintendo on various projects like ports of some of their older titles and some original games of their own like the Fire Emblem series, to work on the new Super Mario RPG sequel. The game would be directed by Ryota Kawade, who was relatively new to the gaming industry as he'd only been an employee of Intelligent Systems since 1994. This was also his directorial debut, as before he'd only really ever been a designer. He wasn't even supposed to be the director at first, he was just an advisor that, I guess, just fell into the role somehow. Possibly due to the strained relationship between Nintendo and Square, or maybe legal issues over the characters, for the sequel, the devs decided to use a style that was different from the original Super Mario RPG. And this is what led to the game taking so long to finish. Mario RPG 2 was planned as far back as at least 1996, with it appearing as an upcoming game in various game magazines, and the game wasn't released until 2000 in Japan and 2001 in the West. A ton of time was spent trying to decide on the art direction this game would take. They experimented with the pre-rendered graphics of the first Mario RPG, and they also tried the polygon graphics of the new Nintendo 64 games, but eventually they settled on a sort of pop-up storybook aesthetic similar to the style used in Yoshi's Story for the N64. The art director for this game was Naohiko Aoyama. In one of the earliest pieces of art for this game, we can see the paper style starting to form. Although it used the Super Mario World sprites, which just looks really uncanny. The devs decided to go for this paper storybook design to make it stand out from all of the other 3D games at the time. It also allowed for more cute and expressive characters. It's interesting how even near the beginning of 3D gaming, the devs wanted to try something different to make it stand out from the rest of the crowd. Going for realistic graphics can make your game look visually amazing, but only for a few years. Soon, graphics will have rapidly evolved and what once looked lifelike now looks like it'll kill me. Originally, they used Silicon Graphics 3D software. Silicon Graphics Inc., aka SGI, was already a big name in the computer graphics industry. Rare used SGI's 3D software while working on Donkey Kong Country. Also, SGI had helped develop the Nintendo 64 as they wanted to expand into consumer technology. They were a part of Nintendo's dream team of early N64 developers, along with companies like Acclaim, Time Warner Interactive, and Angel Studios, who would later become Rockstar San Diego. So Nintendo was quite familiar with SGI and their software, but the Mario RPG 2 devs decided to go back to doing things old school with their old Super Nintendo tools. With the graphics figured out, the other big aspect to take care of was the gameplay. I would spend some time talking about the story, but the devs didn't really spend much time on the story, so I won't either. The devs decided to dial it back on the story a little bit to make it more accessible and lighthearted. Mario RPG 2's story is very simple. Bowser kidnapped Peach and wants to rule the Mushroom Kingdom. Each chapter of the game has smaller stories focusing on each new area you visit, but they're not much more complicated than go punch bad guy in the mouth. The first Mario RPG, while it does take many cues from regular Mario games, it definitely feels like its own thing with plenty of brand new characters and ideas courtesy of Square. Mario RPG 2, though, would bring things a little bit closer to home, only really including stuff that was relevant to the previously established Mario universe. Instead of completely original characters like Mallow and Geno, they would make characters like Goombario and Kooper who were based on existing Mario enemies. Instead of a big grandiose story, this game has a larger emphasis on fun characters, interactions, and dialogue. Dialogue was an interesting conundrum as N64 cartridges didn't have a lot of storage, only 64 megabytes. Compare that to the CD-ROMs that the PlayStation used, which had 10 times the amount of storage. This meant that having voice acting would be difficult due to the amount of space needed to store the lines. If they did have voices, they'd need to be compressed, which would save space but ruin the quality. So instead of voices, the devs used text effects to give each character their own personality. Speaking of audio, the game's music was composed by Taishi Senda and Yuka Tsujiyoko. Tsujiyoko composed music for the Fire Emblem series and is still involved with the series to this day. She was mentored by Hirokazu Tanaka, who composed music for countless iconic Nintendo games, like Duck Hunt, Metroid, Super Mario Land, and even Earthbound. The music in this game is very bubbly and energetic, fitting for the Mario series. It never gets too dark or serious, almost sounding like something you'd hear in a cartoon or a slice of life anime. Alright, let's actually talk about the gameplay now. The developers really wanted to make the gameplay stand out. RPGs can get a little bit boring with all the grinding and repetitive combat, so a ton of time was spent making sure the action was fun and interactive. The game used action commands, which were essentially little mini-games you played that determined how effective each move was. You might have to hit the A button at the right time or tilt the joystick in a certain direction over and over again to do more damage. These seem like pretty minor things, but it really helped to make the combat more engaging than just sorting through a bunch of menus. Instead of starting combat with enemies through random encounters like most RPGs, in this game you can see the enemies on the screen. By attacking them in the world, you can instantly do some damage when the battle begins, giving you the upper hand. Seeing them in the world also means you can avoid them if your health is low or you just don't feel like fighting them. This drastically improved the pace of the game, as the problem with a ton of old school RPGs was the pacing was so slow due to the random encounters that abruptly stopped your progress. In Mario RPG 2, you controlled the speed of the game. As a whole, this game felt more kinetic and action-packed than your typical RPG. There was platforming, obstacles in the overworld you had to dodge, even stealth segments where you had to avoid being seen by enemies. The gameplay was just more engaging than many of its contemporaries. Shigeru Miyamoto, who acted as one of the producers for the game, stated that the game would come out in 1998, but obviously that wasn't the case. At Space World 97, fans did get a good look at this game with tons of new footage. The game was supposed to be released for the new floppy disk-based Nintendo 64 add-on, the 64DD. The 64DD allowed for the Nintendo 64 to play games via a floppy disk drive. It also had a real-time clock and the ability to browse the web. It was also a commercial failure. So, back to the original N64 we go. This new Mario RPG, which at E3 1999 was called Super Mario Adventure before being switched back to Super Mario RPG 2, would now be given the finalized name, Mario Story, likely calling back to Yoshi's Story as that was a big inspiration for this game. The Japanese version of the game was titled Mario Story, however in the West it was called Paper Mario, of course referencing the pop-up book look of the game. It seemed a little odd changing the name of the game so drastically after calling it Super Mario RPG 2 for so long, but like I said earlier, it was probably to distance it from Square's first Super Mario RPG. Just like Super Mario RPG before it, Paper Mario was released late in its console's lifespan, and just like its predecessor, Paper Mario was a big success. It was the best-selling game in Japan the week it was released, and when it came over to the West, it topped sales charts there too, even after the Dreamcast and the PS2 were released. Critically, it performed well too, with reviewers praising its vibrant visuals, quirky story, and unique gameplay. The Paper Mario series has become a staple Nintendo franchise, getting new releases every couple of years, and the second game in the series, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, is still thought of as one of the best RPGs of all time. Paper Mario would pave the way for another popular Mario RPG, the Mario & Luigi series, which expanded upon the action commands of Paper Mario, and also shared its goofy sense of humor. There are even a few indie games directly inspired by Paper Mario. As you can see, this game and the series as a whole has had a huge impact and will continue to live on in the hearts of its fans. Despite all of the issues that this game faced, from losing its original development team, switching consoles, years of development problems, being released after the new generation of consoles were already out, this game managed to become a satisfying success. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please click the like button. It takes less than 5 seconds and it really helps the channel grow. If you guys want to see more videos like this, then please click the subscribe button too. It won't cost you a dime. Thanks guys, remember to push forward when things get tough, and have a good one.